Hello, and welcome to What is Innovation, the podcast that explores the reality of a word that is in danger of losing its meaning altogether. This podcast is produced by Outlast Consulting, LLC, a boutique consultancy that helps companies use innovation principles to solve their toughest business problems. I'm your host, Jared Simmons, and I'm so excited to have Roger Firestien. Dr. Roger Firestien has taught more people to lead the creative process than anyone else in the world. He has presented programs in creativity to over 600 organizations nationally and internationally, ranging from major Fortune 500 corporations, government agencies, universities, associations, and churches. Dr. Firestien is an associate professor and senior faculty at the Center for Applied Imagination at SUNY Buffalo State and president of Innovation Resources, Incorporated. He guest lectures at the University of Buffalo School of Medicine. Roger is the author of 6 books, including Leading on the Creative Edge and Why Didn't I Think of That? His latest book, Create in a Flash, A Leader's Recipe for Breakthrough Innovation, is available worldwide. Dr. Firestien's 7th book, tentatively titled Solve the Real Problem, is scheduled for release in early 2023. Roger, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so excited for this conversation. I've been checking out your books and website and things, and I just can't wait to talk to you and get your point of view on innovation.
Jared, it's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you so much. Yes.
Yeah, well, let's dive right in. What, in your mind, is innovation?
Innovation is solving the real problem. And if I can go a little further than that.
Yes, please.
Creativity is the spark that ignites innovation. There is no innovation without creativity. And being in this business for 44 some years now, I don't make much of a distinction between creativity and innovation. But people out there make a distinction between creativity and innovation. And a story might help. I used to fly on airplanes a lot, and you kind of know the airplane story. You sit down, you settle in, you talk to the person next to you. And so the person asks you, so what do you do? And I'll say, well, I'm a creativity consultant. And they'll say, creativity consultant, well, was that basket weaving? Is that art? Or like, I'm not creative. So that's one scenario, right? Take another scenario. Sit down, same thing. Person turns to you and says, what do you do? I said, well, I'm an innovation consultant. And they go, oh my God, innovation consultant. That's extraordinary. We love innovation. We have innovation. Innovations are corporate. And it's sort of like they're just afraid of creativity, but innovation's okay. All right.
Right.
Not only a consultant, but in the research I've done and worked as academic and a writer over those years. But I just find it really interesting that word creativity scares some people. But, at the initial start, the creative spark is what starts it. And, you and I are both musicians in the world where creativity is pretty comfortable in the musical world. Creativity in the business world is a little bit of a stretch for them. But I think if you look now at every corporate mission statement, innovation is one of the things.
Yes.
But now people are starting to come around talking about creativity a little bit more.
That's good.
So creativity is the spark that ignites innovation.
I love that. I love that you broke it down because creativity, I agree, it's the spark that kind of starts the whole process. It's also, I think, a misconception that creativity only happens at the beginning of an innovation process.
Right.
Because that spark can come at any point in the development of a product or service or just in going about daily life. Bringing a creative mindset to all of it is so crucial because you never know at what point that spark is going to come from.
That's the crucial thing. The new book I'm working on right now that should come out at the end of the year called Solve the Real Problem. One of the things that we're finding is that in my work over the last 40 or so years, and working with hundreds of clients and students and stuff, what I found is that what people come in with the initial definition of the problem is not the problem at all.
Right.
And there's about a 99% chance that what you think is the problem is not the problem.
Right.
And so we spend a lot of time now helping people come up with different definitions of the problem. And the creativity comes in the problem finding. Or the creativity comes in asking the creative questions.
Right.
Because it makes no sense to generate ideas for solving the wrong problem. So let's put some creativity up front, find the best creative question to answer. Then when we generate those ideas that can be very creative, they'll be right on track and they'll solve the problem. The other thing is the implementation of ideas. The idea is there, but how you get it out and get it implemented and get people on board with it. that's a whole creative process in itself. So it happens everywhere in the process, Jared. Right on. I agree with you.
Yeah, that's such a great articulation of that. And because I think when people think corporate innovation and they think creativity, they think, okay, well, yeah, we do that part. We go to this place and we have some people come in and we get some post-its and, we do this for 2 days and then we're done with the creative part.
Check it off. Yeah.
So I think that's my thing. And it's like, yeah, that's great. And that's the thing to do to jumpstart the process. And that has value and merit. But you can't turn off the creativity faucet at the end of day 2 and say, we're done with that. Now let's figure out return on investment and implementation plans and all those other things. All of that requires creativity. And it's just integral to any type of innovative thinking at any point. I mean, you hear a weird noise on the production line. That's a call to creativity.
And I guess the thing around that too is, and I'll tell you a story if we have a little bit of time around this.
Sure.
This is a story about how a piece of scrap metal saved the airline industry billions of dollars. And the story goes that in the late 70s, a young engineer named Scott Kempshall went to work for Boeing, and he was assigned the Boeing 747 cockpit crew, okay? On the 4th day of work, this mechanism landed on his desk. It had like an arm sticking out of it and a mechanism on it. And what it was the windshield wiper mechanism for the 747, because the 747 had this unique hump. All right.
Oh, right. Yeah.
When the air would flow over the front of the 747, as the airplane was taking off and landing, it would blow the windshield wipers off the windshields.
Oh my God.
So in Scott's words, this is engineering words. He goes, so on takeoff and landing, the pilot lost visibility. I said, Scott, you mean the pilot couldn't see the runway on takeoff and landing? He goes, yeah.
Oh my God.
So his job was to get this mechanism certified. Okay.
Wow.
Now the mechanism cost about $10,000. They had to have 2 of them. They weighed 20 pounds each. That was 40 pounds. And the way it worked was this mechanism took the airspeed, it tightened a spring that actuated a motor that then pushed the windshield wiper on the window. Okay. Get it certified. Problem you need to solve is how to get this thing FAA certified, kid. The 4th day or the 5th day of work, he goes out and they take a tour around the plant. And they come across this bin of scrap metal. And they're about 3 inches long. They got a little scoop to them. And Scott asks his guide, he said, well, what are these? And the guide goes, he said, well, we had a railing that was a little too long in the design, so we just had to clip these off. And so he goes, can I take a couple of those? And when I interviewed Scott, he said, it looked like little scoops to me. So what he did was he went back, he got some wind tunnel time. He took these pieces of scrap metal and he riveted them to the windshield wipers, all right? The first time they tried it, the windshield wipers came off the window. He adjusted them a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. And then he said, there's nothing we could do to get those windshield wipers to come off the windshield. Rain, snow, air, he said. And so he goes back to the boss. He said, hey, these things don't cost anything. Do you think these will work? And the boss goes like, that's extraordinary. Now let's look at the numbers of it.
Wow.
Yeah. So to change this mechanism, the airplane had to be taken out of service for about 10 days. They had to pull the whole cowling off of the front.
Cowling off, yeah.
So it would cost about $100,000 to change the windshield wiper mechanism, and you still have to replace the windshield wipers, okay? Now, it was a complicated piece of machinery, so it had to be replaced probably about every 10 years. And so the lifespan of the 747 is about 30 years. That means that we need to replace about 3 times. That's a $300,000 investment. And there were 1,500 airplanes that were delivered. So in 1980 dollars, that was about $4 billion to replace the windshield wipers. In 2020 dollars, that's about $11 billion to replace them.
Oh my God.
Now, all you have to do is replace the windshield wipers just like you do on a car. It takes about 2 hours. They do it right on the tarmac, costs about $2,000. And if you look at a 747, it kind of looks like a clothespin. It's maybe 6 to 8 inches long.
Yeah.
He made an airfoil.
Yeah. Directed the airflow.
Exactly. What he did was he redefined the problem. All right.
Yeah.
So weight is eliminated. You don't have the extra 40 pounds.
Yeah.
You don't have the $20,000. But the key thing about this, and this goes back to what we talked about earlier, is that your innovation center. Now, Scott did not proposes to come up with his idea in the brand new innovation center.
Right.
He did not talk to the senior innovation officer.
Right.
He did not talk to the vice president for innovation. Right. All he did was ask a couple of questions. All right.
Yep.
And he had the tenacity, and Boeing at that time was open enough to say, hey, try it out. He actually won a design award on that.
Yeah, he should.
That invention has saved the airline industry billions of dollars. And as I was talking to some of my friends who actually service big airplanes for the Air Force, he goes, yeah, we use those all the time. They're accepted by the industry.
Wow.
Cost nothing, saved billions of dollars because he asked some creative questions. So this whole idea is, in the business that I've been in, I have not ever seen a mandated innovation system that works.
Right.
Because you can't impose it on people from the outside.
Right.
You can give them a seminar, you can give them a workshop, you can have them read books, but you can't make somebody be creative.
No.
You just have to set up the environment so it's creative. And so that's the story out of that. Just to carry the analogy along a little bit farther, and this is we talk about in Solve the Real Problem. The biologist and nature writer Lewis Thomas wrote about bees, and he said, what you can do with bees is you can set them up in a hive, have a perfect hive, bring in a healthy queen, but you can't make the bees make honey. Issue protocols on carbohydrate chemistry or solar navigation, all right? But the air has to be right. So you have to make the air right. So what you need to do in organizations is make the air right. And then you have stuff like Scott Kempshaw comes saying, hey, this piece of scrap metal can say, $11 billion later.
That's such a...
Yeah, make the air right.
Make the air right. I love that. That is such a great analogy and such a succinct way of kind of helping people understand this. It's not the process. It's the ecosystem. It's the environment. It's the air.
Yeah.
And believing that you can install a process that will drive innovation, I think, is one of the core. It doesn't make sense to me.
No, you can't impose it on somebody. You can't. We're going to have mandated brainstorming sessions every month. Well, why?
Right. Yeah.
Teach people to do the techniques. And over the years, I've taught less and less and less and less techniques. And in Creating a Flash, the book that came out, we give you 4 or 5 creativity techniques that work consistently based on 40 years. You don't need every single technique to make it work.
No.
So the stuff that works consistently.
Yeah. And I love the focus on the problem, because to me, I think that's what gets lost when you focus on the process.
Or you focus on an idea looking for a problem to solve.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Roger, I think we are birds of a feather in this environment.
Kindred soul here, my friend. Yeah,
exactly. So we talked a bit about what innovation is. What isn't innovation?
Innovation is not coming up with a new idea. Innovation is solving the real problem.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And how do you see people get tripped up on that?
I work with organizations sometimes, and I've been brought into organizations to work with folks to help them figure out what the real problem is. And these are large. The Defense Department is one of our clients. My goodness, you can't figure out what the real problem is? Well, the reason why is because you've been in a command and control environment.
Yeah.
What the problem is what you've been told is the problem by your superior officer.
Yeah.
And so you haven't been really taught to challenge the initial definition of the problem. So where people get tripped up is they'll say, hey, I got this great idea. Okay, great. So what problem is it going to solve? Well, I don't know. It's got this great idea. And this is why a lot of the innovation programs get tripped up, because you have people coming up with all these great ideas. And I've heard this time after time after time after time. People will say to me, well, I've got this great idea, but nobody wants to listen to me. Okay, that's fair. That's great. But your way you're going to get somebody to listen to you is you have a problem to solve. Scott had a problem to solve.
Right.
The windshield wiper thing. All right. Now, he could have ignored those pieces of scrap metal and say they have nothing to do with my problem. But as a matter of fact, they had everything to do with his problem. And he could have followed the path and gotten this thing certified. But no, he challenged the definition of the problem. And I think, Jared, in the work that I'm doing now in the book, Solve the Real Problem, and this came upon me about a month or so ago, we asked people, give us an example in your field of what you thought the problem was, but it really wasn't the problem. And so we get all these examples from business, from education, from medicine, from agriculture, from mediation. And then it occurred to me that the reason why we're so bad at this is that as far as innovation is concerned, in many cases, we've been taught that, coming up with lots of ideas is great, and that's what it's all about. But coming up with lots of different problems is not. Whereas, as a matter of fact, just as you generate lots and lots of ideas for solving a problem, back up. Generate lots and lots of ways to state the problem. We call them creative questions.
Right.
And they begin with words like how to, or how might I, or what might be all the ways to. So come up with a whole bunch of creative questions that you want to answer. Find the best question and then solve that. So move the creativity up in the process. Instead of saying, It's just here with ideas, which is where most people think it all is. The creativity is really in finding the problem.
Yes, no, and that gives a lot to think about and unpack. I mean, because it really does reframe what you define as brainstorming, what you define as these creativity workshops, and when and how they happen. What does an output look like from something like that? And then it also kind of makes me anyway think about how you go about rewarding people.
Yes.
Because I think a lot of times you don't patent questions, you patent ideas that have been kind of molded into something patentable. But then if you think about it, asking the right question, the question isn't how do I get this approved by the government? The question is how do I keep the windshield wipers on the plane?
Right.
Fortunately, this person took it all the way through and got the credit they deserve. But that reframing probably gets lost in the shuffle quite a bit.
It does, because I think in the way, and this is based on a discussion we had earlier, in a way that people perceive innovation and creativity, it's all perceived around ideas. Questions begin the creative process, answers end it. Questions begin the creative process, answers end the creative process. So if we're coming up with more and more questions, that keeps the creative process going. Now, we're comfortable with answers. The reason why is that we're so uncomfortable coming up with problems is because we haven't been taught to do that. We've been given the problem. 2 + 2 equals 4. What's the capital of Poland? Warsaw. We haven't given them a situation to figure out what the real problem is. We're not comfortable with that. One of the things I do is I make people comfortable with ambiguous situations. And we say, well, what are all the creative questions here? And we make it a little bit more disarming. It's like, what are all the problems here? Well, when you say problems, it's like, people jam up.
Yeah.
But what are all the creative questions you have about this situation? Then when you find the best creative question to solve, then generate ideas for solving it. And your ideas are going to be much more on point, much more on target, because you spent the time up front figuring out what the real problem is.
Right. Got it. No, that makes a lot of sense. That's so great. I love it when frameworks and processes and structures get simpler. And, when you boil it down to problems, questions, ideas, these are things that it's plain English.
Right.
It's, knowable things. You can explain it to an 8-year-old.
Right.
And you don't clutter your problem solving mind with all of this jargon that you have to then kind of manipulate while trying to solve a problem. So I love the elegance of what you've been able to create and the way you communicate it.
Well, one of your questions here is how has innovation shaped your career? And I think this can kind of go back to when I began this field back in the 70s and 80s, and we were having some of the same issues we were going on here, is that people were complicating stuff. And so my mantra is keep creativity simple, make it practical, help people to apply their creativity in their world. Keep creativity simple, make it practical, help people to apply creativity in their world. Now, there's times that creativity can get complicated, and that's on the research side. There's tremendous amount of research that's gone now in the field of creativity. When I was coming up in the 70s and the 80s, you didn't study creativity because creativity was not a field valid of study.
Right.
And now the Southern Oregon University Creativity Conference is out. The Journal of Creativity Research was out in 1990.
Wow.
The Journal of Creative Behavior began in 1967.
Wow.
But it wasn't established as a real formal discipline. And now you have doctoral programs on creativity.
Wow.
We have one coming up at SUNY Buffalo State. But, 30 years ago, the study of creativity was poo-pooed,
Right. Yeah.
And I had colleagues that went over that wanted to do their doctorates, and folks in the psychology department would say, well, we'll get that creativity stuff out of you because there really isn't anything there. My goodness, how it's changed. How it's changed. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Indeed. Roger, this has been so enlightening and energizing, frankly, for me, as I continue out in this world of innovation and creativity and trying to help folks drive real impact for their organizations. And so thank you for that. And
my pleasure.
I want to also kind of ask, so I've taken a lot from the conversation, but do you have any specific advice that you would offer innovators out there and creatives?
Well, there's a couple of things around that. Is just stay at it, keep working at it. And then the other thing, I think this is for anybody, is just do what you love. When I got into this business, now remember, this is the late 70s, okay? What was coming up then was the quality circle movement. Books like In Search of Excellence hadn't even been written yet. People weren't writing business books, okay?
Right.
And so I had a college professor, Dr. James Warner, and we were working together. And I said, Jim, I really love this creativity stuff. And I said, I don't know if I'm ever going to make a living doing it. He goes, well, it's been my experience that when people fall in love with what they're doing, they tend to find a way to make a living doing it. So I would just say to your creative folks out there is that, maybe your career hasn't been invented yet. Because when I came out there, about 1 or 2 or 3 people in the industry that were out doing this kind of stuff. And now they're all over the place because the field has opened up so much.
Right.
So do what you love, follow that passion, and then always kind of challenge your initial definition of what you think is the problem. And that's my new soapbox over the last year or so. And that's been a culmination of work over many, many years to say, what we think is the problem isn't the problem at all. I'm doing a lot of work in medical education right now, and we're working with medical students to help them to redefine what the problem is, because 40,000 people every year in this country die because of misdiagnosis.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And so if you could diagnose what the problem is, if you can ask the right creative questions, if you have the skill to ask those creative questions, then the answers open up to you. But if you come in and look at the x-ray and say, well, this is it, and solve the real problem, we've got example after example after example, medical examples included, where what they thought was the problem isn't the problem at all. And very simply, just asking what the real problem is or asking a few creative questions, they get the breakthrough. So just keep at it, fall in love with it, challenge your initial definition of what you think is the problem. Don't judge your ideas while you're generating them. And if you get stuck, look around and make connections with the things that are around you to help your ideas keep flowing again.
Fantastic. Great stuff. Thank you, Roger, for your time. Innovation is solving the real problem. And thank you so much.
My pleasure, Jared.
It's been a genuine pleasure, and I look forward to staying connected.
You got it.
All right. Take care. We'd love to hear your thoughts about this week's show. You can drop us a line on Twitter at Outlast LLC, OUTLAST LLC, or follow us on LinkedIn where we're Outlast Consulting. Until next time, keep innovating, whatever that means.